Test. Nice. And YouTube keeps like opting us into the like new YouTube streamer, like the beta, and the UI is like very confusing. So I always get lost when I start like streaming in the morning. Sharing up. I'm just gonna unplug this. All right. All right. And whoop-pow. And whoop-pow. There we go. Nice. Hey, Calgary, just let me know when the video and the audio is going through for you, and then we'll get started. Let me know when the video and the audio is going through. Nice. And all of Lighthouse Calgary says we're good. What's up? Yo, you have made it to the midterms. What? Crazy. How nuts is that? This is fittingly just about halfway through the program. It's almost as if it was planned that way. The midterms are a ton of fun. You have already been assigned the groups or pairs that you're working in, correct? Cool. You've already started thinking about the various projects that you could embark on. Calgary, everybody in Vancouver has decided to do the card game, all of them. So a challenge to you is also all. Now choose whichever projects you want. Huh? Can you? Oh yeah, all of Vancouver decided not to do the card game, but I think I might still sway a couple. There are a couple different options for the project, and there's a couple different ways that you can attack a software project in general. Now, up until now, you have had considerable amount of guidance through the projects that you've worked on. You'll have worked on Tiny App. You've worked on Tweeter. Both of those amazing projects. Lots of stuff going into them. Tiny App has good old backend built with Express. Tweeter got a front end built with jQuery, Ajaxy stuff. Very cool. Very cool. You've even done some database stuff. Worked with migrations and all of that. Very cool. Now we get to mash all that stuff together, and you get to build something that's unique to you. So at the beginning of the program, if I'm correct, you saw the, at least some of you may have seen the midterm projects of the previous cohort. And now that is you. You get to do that. So I'm going to take you through today the process for what we recommend you should go through when you're building your midterm project. This is not the only way to build software. It's not the only way. This is probably the best way to do it for your midterms. You cut through all the extra stuff. I'm going to tell you exactly what it is that you need to kind of focus on. Before I even dive into this, you have a long time to work on your midterms. You have today until like Friday. What? That's a lot of time. That's a ton of time, right? You will definitely have time to like hit even the stretch features that you lay out for yourself, as long as you plan things properly, right? And as long as you work together as a group, and still make copious kind of use of mentor help, right? Because you can still do that. You can still ask mentors for help. Obviously, though, all of your projects are going to be slightly unique. So before I even go into this stuff, like expect mentor help to be a little bit different over the course of this week, because you're not going through like guided assignments. This is going to be a little bit more open-ended. There's going to have to be like a little bit more kind of creative thought in how you're doing this stuff. The theme of today's lecture is obviously planning your midterm, but with a sub-team of you're not ready to code yet. If I see a single line of code written within the next couple hours, honestly, before even the end of the day, I will curl up and scream and just kind of whine and just, why? You're not ready to code yet, and we'll see why. Now, so I'm going to make sure that no one in Calgary wants the card game. That's not true, Casey. You just haven't seen me pump up the card game yet. Nah, you can not pick the card game. That's cool. It's fine. There are many projects to pick from. These are all great. They're all vetted projects. I've seen students do all of these in many different kind of variations. Every time somebody does one of any of these projects, it ends up being unique in some way, shape, or form. They're all cool. I really like the wiki map. I just like maps. I think maps are really nice. I really like the resource wall. I think with the resource wall, you get some cool kind of UI stuff going on, right? But really, all of these are neat. The food pickup ordering has a neat kind of life cycle to it. Because you got to order food, and then the food has to be shipped and all that. It's like cool. They all of these projects kind of attack different problems. They pose different issues, again, from a UI or a technical standpoint. All very interesting, and you can put your own spin on them. Like, each of these projects comes with a set of stories, right? A set of requirements or features. It does not mean you have to limit yourself to that, right? It does not mean you have to hit all of them, right? Maybe talk with a mentor about how your idea of maybe what the wiki map is sort of morphed version of what our idea of the wiki map is. Maybe we can make that work, right? So use these as kind of starting points. Definitely try to follow within the funnel of a decision maker or whatever. Either way, you kind of pick a project. Now, my recommendation is as a group, right, as pairs, you don't pick a single project. Try to pick 3, right? Try to pick 3 and really discuss your top 3 in depth, heavily. You're going to be spending a lot of time on these projects, right? You want to make sure that you choose one that you're going to have a lot of fun with. So for the first little bit of the planning situation for this, I want y'all to be in a headspace, thinking about what is this project going to look like if we chose this, right? What are the particular issues that we see ourselves running into? What are the things that would be really fun about working on this project? And try to do that again for multiple ones, right? And many of the steps that I'm going to be taking you through are pretty, I don't want to say simple, but quick steps to go through. You should be able to iterate over and over with different projects until you feel ready to choose one. With that in mind, though, I'm going to pretend that we kind of chose one project as we take ourselves through this situation here. So when you're trying to plan out a particular project, the first place to kind of start is with the data. I already made the data joke, yeah. So with the data. So data, as we all know, is vital. It's everything. It is, some would say, the new oil. Data is very valuable. The data is really going to shape the way that you think about each of your web dev projects. Now, by far, the most common thing that web dev projects have with each other is the fact that they all kind of interact with data in some way. Now, we could even, in a way, kind of think of a web app as a window into data, right? It's a window into accessing and interacting with data in a meaningful and interesting way. If I'm talking about Wikipedia, the data is the articles and the knowledge, and I have the access to view those articles or edit those articles or talk with people about those articles in the talk page, right? If my data is videos, such as on YouTube, then I can do stuff with videos on YouTube. If it's Facebook posts, or if I'm talking about Facebook, then the data might be my friends and the statuses and pictures and stuff that my friends post. Right? And really, all the stuff about the project or about the application is going to be centered around the fact that we're interacting in some way with data. To really drive the point home, it's and this won't necessarily be the case for your project, but say we own Facebook, right? Say we work at Facebook, or we are collectively Mark Zuckerberg, the hive mind, and one day, one of our interns accidentally deletes all of the front end and back end code. Oh no, really not a big deal, right? We still have our databases, right, filled with all the data, all our tasty data, and it's not very hard if we already even know what the design of the application was supposed to be in the first place, to just build that front end and back end shell, right, to serve the data properly. Right? Maybe for a couple months it'll be an ugly application, that's fine. But the data's still there. Where we would really be in trouble is if the data suddenly disappeared and all we have is just random front end and back end that doesn't really do anything because there are no users on there anymore. Now, that story is like a little way off for your midterm projects, but if you do think about data as you plan out your project and as you think about like and ideate what each of these projects could be, there's some like lead kind of guiding questions that will help you come up with particular features, okay, and particular ways of like designing those features for those projects. For example, if we say that everything starts with data, well, when we're building a web dev project, what is the data that we can access or acquire? Right? Does that data come from my users? Does that data come from an API? Does that data come from an administrator inputting that data one by one? Right? If I'm, for example, I'm going to, I think, use as my idea of a final project, I'm going to use an application that helps friends figure out what movie they should go watch by finding a movie theater that is in the center between all of the friends, but also has like the highest rated movie on IMDb recently. Right? Like, let's say that that's the idea. It's not one of the midterm projects, but it's just a idea. And if I think about the data that would work there, right, I'd have to think about how do I get maybe the locations of my friends, right, the locations of the users. How do I get the movies that are playing? How do I get the theaters, right, that are playing movies? Right? And also, how do I get the ratings of the movies? Right? Those are all like different things that are sources of data that my application depends on. Right? And maybe depending on the way that I can actually source that data, that'll actually change the way that I have to structure my application. Now, the second question there is, or at least these two here, are particularly important though, because what is the data you can access or acquire? It's like if you were building a real product, that's something you really have to think about. If you're building a midterm project, like you could hard code some data. Nobody cares. That's fine. But those two over there are really going to help you guide what the features look like. When I say, how can the data that I have access to be used to like represent something else, such as the fact that a movie is playing somewhere in the center of all my friends, right? I can correlate that to the fact that like all of us can make it to the movie on time, right? Like all of us can make it to the movie at the same time. And if I want to say how can that data be pivoted to add value, what I'm going to mean by that sentence is how does the way that I'm showing the data to my user, how does that impact them in a beneficial way? Right? Why does the user care? Right? So if I'm, for example, talking about, and we got a little flicker. Cool. If I'm, for example, talking about, again, an application that shows movies that are playing somewhere in between my friends, right? It makes sense to show that data as a map, as opposed to a list. Right? It makes sense to show it as a map because then everybody can see where that movie is playing. If I want to show movies by rating, right, it makes sense to maybe have symbols that show like how many stars, right? So that somebody's able to look at the application, they don't have to like parse through stuff, right? The data is immediately kind of pivoted to add value to the user who's looking at it. These are kind of terse questions. You don't need to like actually take yourself physically through like really answering this stuff in a rigorous way. Mainly, what I really want you to start thinking about is the idea of what I'm going to call features versus benefits. Right? you can come up with a bunch of things that your application should be able to do. Right? And these are features. Right? Oh, my application allows people to log in. My application allows people to add friends. My application allows people to search for movies by genre. Right? Those are all features. Benefits are a subset of features that are actually core to making your application work and be useful. Right? There are some features that are just not core. Right? No one's going to care. Oh, my application allows people to find the closest and highest rated Nicolas Cage movie. Right? Like, okay, maybe that's a feature that we don't need to implement right now if that's not the core reason that your application exists. Right? That's a feature, but it's not necessarily a benefit. What you can do as you're brainstorming, and again, I recommend doing this for like more than one project, is come up with a bunch of possible features and then highlight the ones that are core to the application. Right? Brainstorming it's a very good kind of skill to get into. Just toss out a bunch of stuff on paper, and then you go through and you identify the features that you put down by this kind of matrix. This is Nima's matrix of universal values. Right? Some things in your list of features that you come up with are going to fall within this. People want to look good. People want to look good. That's just a thing. If you make a product that makes people look good, right, they'll tend to like it. Right? More than anything, if you make a product that makes people look good, they will look at your product and go, oh, I understand why I would use this product. Or I understand why you spent so much time working on this project. Right? And that's what you're really trying to hit. Looking good. Example of looking good, if we're talking about Snapchat, Snapchat has those like face lenses that like whiten your teeth and structure your chin, whatever, physically making you look good to people. Another product that maybe makes people look good is, I'm going to go back to Facebook again. People post on Facebook or people post on Instagram because they want to look good to their friends, right? Want to be like, yeah, check it out. I'm at the beach or whatever people do nowadays. I'm crying alone again. Yeah, no. So applications, if it's centered around making somebody look good, then chances are that that's a good kind of direction to go into, and you can start trimming your features and figuring out which ones are benefits that target towards looking good. Right? Another direction that can work is feeling good. Does an application make someone feel good? Maybe it makes them feel good about themselves. Maybe it's an application that every day sends you a nice little message. Just boop. Oh, I'm cared for, right? Like that's a web application that makes somebody make somebody feel good. Another application that might make somebody feel good is a product that shows people cute pictures of dogs, right? And you can pitch that to someone when you're doing your presentation as, have you ever felt bad? Do you like dogs? Here's this application that keeps showing you pictures of dogs. That's very simple motivation. Then you get to cut out all the features that don't target that thing immediately. The other two are pretty self-explanatory as well. People like to save time. Does your application help people find the quickest way to get somewhere? Right? But with combination of bike, bus, and Uber. I don't know. Or does your application help people save money? Right? Oh, this project, it's a resource wall that lets people collect prices for avocados and track which avocados around the city are cheapest and when, so they can save money and get the cheapest avocados. Again, generally, if you're able to spin your project in a look good, feel good, save time, or save money, right, you're probably in a direction where coming up with more features that are benefits is going to be a little bit easier. Right? If you look at your project and you can't really pin it down as one or two of these, you're going to have a hard time. this is not science, but it's like a heuristic. Like things just tend to kind of work out this way. Are there any questions about this slide? Cool. So, boop. This is the most important slide of the entire presentation today. It was a fairly long presentation. User stories. User stories. Can I hear you say the word user story? User story. Let me play Dora. Do you see a user story? Yeah, there we go. That's the user story. What? Yeah, user stories. You gotta write user stories, bro. Like, please. Please, write some user stories. This is a user story. As a blank, I want to blank because blank. Right? Write out what your project is about and actually how it's used. As a person with friends, I want to ask my friends if they're free to watch a movie because I want to hang out with my friends. As a user who has invited a bunch of friends to watch movies, I want to see the movies that are close to me because I don't want to go watch a movie that's like 4 hours away. I want to watch a movie close by. Right? Listing out the actual things that my application is about and like an actual description of sort of how somebody's going to be working through using the application. You need to write this stuff together as a group. Right? It's not very hard to write these, especially once you get into the rhythm of it. It's not very hard to write these, and you should write a ton of them, right? And then cut down to the core ones. Here's another kind of variation of how you can write that same sentence. As a user who has invited a bunch of friends to watch a movie, I should be able to see the movies that are nearby because, and then same as before. Really just two ways of phrasing the same sentiment. Some people like writing things this way. Some people like writing this way. It doesn't make a difference. But the point is that we're trying to create a list of kind of like atomic features, atomic things about your application where you should be able to honestly just have that written up set of user stories, give it to someone, and they should understand everything about your application. Right? Now, ideally, you'd be even able to like take your list of user stories, ship them off to another country, to another set of developers somewhere, wait a couple days, and then get a full application that actually hits everything that you were aiming for. Okay? You want your user stories to be very, very refined. There's another kind of thing called a oh, that's a fuse. Called a user scenario. And a user scenario is sort of a variation of this kind of idea, except a user scenario is really going to be talking about interacting with the application. So whereas a user story is talking about a motivation, right, or a goal that we're trying to hit, like I want to be able to see all the movies close to me. A user scenario is something more like, given that I have invited a bunch of friends, when I click on the movie map, then I should see the movies close to me. Right? And it's a little bit more of a technical description of how a user is using the application. Both of these are very important. You definitely have to have user stories before you can get into the user scenarios, right? Because the user scenarios are going to come out of your user stories. Right? And please, there, I'm back. So again, just practice making lots of these. This is why I recommend picking more than one project, right? And so you can crunch out a bunch of user stories and just get good, right? You just get good at crunching this stuff out. Here's an example of a user story with a scenario. This little big chunk of stuff. In this example here, to give you some context, the project in this idea here is a website where people can share short stories. You can read short stories, and here they're saying users should be able to save story. Right? So there's a nice title to this thing. And then there's your traditional user story, which says, as a user, I want to save the story that I'm reading because I found it useful, or because I found it nice or fun. Right? I want to save a story that I'm reading. That's your traditional user story. There's nothing talking about how a user interacts with the application. There's nothing talking about how we achieve that goal. It's just a goal that a user wants to hit. I want to be able to save a story that I'm reading. And then our scenario actually lists out how that's supposed to happen. Right? Given that I'm reading a story, when I tap a particular icon to save a story, then save it to my saved stories. Right? So there's this motivation, and there's the actual interaction or the scenario that goes through and hits that goal. Now, what I, again, would recommend is that as groups, you sit down and you figure out a bunch of user stories, right? A bunch of goals that you want to hit with your application, right? As a user, I want to find the cheapest avocados in Calgary, right? I want to find the cheapest avocados in Calgary. As a user, I want to send a text message to everyone in Vancouver, right? As a big user story. So I want to send a text message to everyone in Vancouver. Right? Those are user stories. Then we get to okay, well, how is the user going to do that? Right? And that's our scenario. And you can spend a lot of time discussing the scenario. Right? I could look at this and I'd say, hey, in order to achieve that user story, one particular scenario is, given that I'm reading a story, when I shout out, save the story, then it should save the story. Right? And now I've hit the same user story, but with a different scenario. Right? So there's lots of variation that you can have in your scenarios. Are there any questions about this particular slide right now? Cool. Very important. This is super, super crucial. We're going to come back to this over and over and over again over the course of the presentation in different ways. One variation that one can add to a scenario, by the way, is say that you want to, in your scenario, talk about visual indicators or changes that happen on the screen when a user does something. Here it is. Given that I'm reading a story, when I tap the icon, then save it to my saved stories, and alter the icon to indicate success. Maybe it turns into a green check mark, or a heart, right, or a star. And so notice there's no code happening yet. We're not coding. But the thing about code is we write code to solve problems. Right? We write code to solve problems with particular solutions in mind. And if we don't have a good idea of what the problems and the solutions are, we can't really write code. Right? There's no reason to write code. Right? Every single line of code that you write, I'm going to say this again and again as we go forward, every single line of code that you write has to come out of your user stories. Right? If the code that you're writing is not related to something that you've documented as a thing that the user should be able to do, or your application should be able to do, then why are you writing the code? And now, I don't have the resources to be that tough on everyone about that. But when you're working somewhere, right? When you're working somewhere and you write some code and then you ask to merge it into the main code base, you will constantly have to defend your code and say, this is why I wrote this particular thing. Sometimes those are going to be technical defenses. You have to say, oh, well, I used an array here because this, or I used a whatever here because this. Other times, you're actually going to have to defend why you wrote the code in the first place. Right? And the easiest or most foolproof way of doing that is actually having that encoded in your user story and saying, my code actually targets that particular thing. Right? So what we're trying to hit is this goal I'm going to call feature complete. And I'm going to call feature complete. That's what we're hitting. Right? You list out a bunch of user stories. Right? You find the ones that make up a full product, right? Or a full project with no empty kind of avenues. And then you target just those features that you've isolated. And when you hit all of those, you've reached a place in your project where you can call it feature complete. It's basically like your 1.0. Right? You've hit everything. And no one could look at your project and say, well, what about this other situation? Right? You're trying to make sure that you have this full kind of sphere. we're not aiming for a full product for your final for your midterm project. Even for your final project, we're not aiming for a full product. There's no like go to market, like we need to validate this or whatever. No one cares. You're trying to build something that's just cool. You're trying to build something that's neat, something that kind of shows off what your skills are, but at the same time is intriguing. Right? Think that this project is going to end up on your resume. Same with your final project. It's going to end up on your resume, and you want to be able to talk about it, and you want to be able to talk about it in like an exciting way. Right? So we're looking at the idea of minimum viable product, or MVP. Or MVP does not mean that, I've been able to figure out, like, you can log in, you can log out. If you try to log in with the wrong password, it doesn't log you in. If your password is too short, it doesn't let you register. Like, all these little extra things. Or, if you pick, say you're doing a food order app, and you're like, if you pick a location that is in a different country, like it won't deliver to you or whatever. Those are all such extra things. Right? You focus on just straight up your aha moment of, that's why these people spent a week working on this project. Like, I get it. That's neat. No one is going to look at your project and go like, I get it. The icon glows when you hover over it. Like, wow. And you're up here for your presentation. You're like, that took me 3 days. Oh man, you have no idea. Like, that stuff is cool, absolutely. But there's a time and a place for it, right? My recommendation is that you take like the extra funky stuff, move that to stretch, and you make sure you focus on your aha moment, right? And specifically, you can take your user stories, right, and make sure that those user stories end up creating an interesting, some people call it like an epic. You end up creating an interesting life cycle for a user that you can take through in a presentation. Right? We do not want to end up with a weird house. So, has anyone seen this picture of this house before? Or ever heard of, this is called the Winchester Mansion? Yeah. So, do you want to come up here and explain what the Winchester Mansion is to Calgary? It's haunted? Yeah.
Is it in Alberta?
It's not in Alberta, no. What's that? Exactly. It's a house that just kept being built for the sake of having new rooms and new features. Long story short, Winchester, Lady Winchester of Winchester rifle fame, after her husband died, she started having a little bit of, seeing ghosts and things. She started seeing like psychics and mediums, and they told her, "Yeah, no, your house is haunted, man. Like it's definitely, yep." And what they said was like, "Listen, you gotta deal with these ghosts, but we're not gonna deal with them in some kind of like, what's that movie? It's not like gonna be like an exorcism or any of that stuff. Instead, what we're gonna do is we're going to turn your house into a maze so that the ghosts, they get lost. So we're going to keep adding more doors and windows and rooms and staircases, and with like many different contractors over the course of like 25 years or something. She kept adding stuff to the house. Like, you want to have a spiral staircase? Yeah, I love spiral staircases. Where should the spiral staircase lead to? We'll figure it out later. Have it go into a wall for now, and then one day we might put in a room, right? Should we put a window here? Yeah, totally. What should that window face? I don't know. How about a wall? Let's have it face a wall, totally. So we've ended up with this bizarre mansion. This could be you. This could be you with your midterm project. This could be you with your final project. This could be you at work. Like, catch yourself. Anytime you go like, wouldn't it be cool if? No, it wouldn't be cool. Is it part of your user stories? If it's not, forget it, right? Absolutely forget it. Is it core to your application working? If it's not, forget it. You're gonna be halfway through your project and you're like, oh, you know what? We should have like a VR component to this, to the card game. There's totally a VR component to the card game. No. Cut that stuff, right? Unless your application is about VR, which it shouldn't be. What I'm really trying to say, maybe I've gone a little too far on this, but what I'm trying to say is that you want to multiple times take yourself through the story of your application before you even start coding it, and catch yourself anywhere where things kind of maybe blossom into being a little too much. Right? That's going to take a little bit of time, and you're definitely going to run into things that will become little funnels. Right? Just catch yourself when you arrive at that place. Maybe something that you can do is frequently ask for help from mentors to take a look at your user stories. Right? Every time midterms happen, students will ask for tons of help on the coding. Right? And for some reason, no one ever asks, hey, can you take a look at my user stories right now? Maybe do that. Key kind of hot tips. These are really hot tips. If you aren't going to demo it, just don't build it. No one cares. Don't build it. You see people do frequently asked questions and about pages for their midterm projects. What are you gonna do? During the midterm, you go to the about page, and I'll just give you a minute to read through our about. You just wait? Nah, you haven't done this yet, but I've seen people do it. It's pretty funny. But frequently asked questions. Here's a fun fact. No one's ever used your application. No one has any questions. So there's nothing to put in there. That is great for when you flesh out your thing into a product, by all means. That's awesome. Right now, though, as far as your midterm goes, don't worry about that stuff. It's another thing. Are people going to register for your application during the demo? If the answer to that is no, maybe don't build a sign-up page. Right? We don't need to see how people register for your application. Why? Well, we've already seen that you know how to do registration because you did TinyApp. Well, if the core of your application is the best, the most fantastic sign-up process ever, right? The most personal, oh, when you sign up, you have a video call with our CEO who personally welcomes you to the social media network. If that was it, then cool. But if it's just put in your username and your password and you log in, no one cares. And here's a bit of controversy, hot take. You don't need to put in full-on login functionality. You don't need crazy cookies, encryption and whatever. Here's a login route. Copy this code and use it in your application. When somebody makes a GET request to /login/ Nima or /Bradlina or whatever, set their session cookie to say that they're logged in and then redirect them. That's it. So your login can just be you click a single button to log in. Doesn't matter. Okay? In fact, in terms of demo, that might even work out really well, is if you have two buttons, one that logs in as user A and one that logs you in as user B. Okay? So if you're trying to show multiple users, then that's something you can do. Okay, never do this at work. If you go to your first junior dev job and your senior's oh, we need to roll out some authentication, some a login route, and you're oh yeah, Nima taught me how to do that in week 5, day 5. Yeah, that's a quick road to stern talking to town. But for the midterm project, it's fine. Honestly, as an extension, as an extension of that thought, you can do this for your personal project, right? Unless your personal project is about login, right? No one is ever going to go look at your code and be oh, but how did the login work, right? Just do this. It's fine. Are there any questions over what I've passed through? And that includes you, Calgary. Do you have any questions?
If you have a cool idea that doesn't really fit within the requirements,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So for Calgary, the question was, if we have a cool idea that doesn't really fit the requirements of the midterms, is that something we can discuss? I'm going to say yes, because it might. Maybe you just haven't thought about it in a particular way. If it doesn't, I might just suggest moving that to the final project. But yeah, let's talk about that. And same goes for you, Calgary. Like maybe chat with mentors, chat with Hafiz, just name drop, or chat with other people, like instructors and mentors, to see if maybe your project idea can fit. I will recommend though to like try and keep your thoughts within the 7 or so that we've set out. You can start thinking about stuff for your final project. In fact, time is at 10:43. One of the things that I will say is that you can 100% take this midterm project as an opportunity to gather data for yourself on like what it's like to work on a project like this. You have likely never worked on a project of this scale, likely, right? There's a lot of stuff that will go wrong. Just a lot of stuff. Merge conflicts. Woo! So much fun. You're going to deal with those. Here's another one. Interpersonal issues. What? Yeah, that's right. Who here has worked on group projects before? Yeah. Oh, man. Who here is convinced that just everyone in the world is exactly like you and you're always going to get along? All right. Yeah, you're going to have a bad time, my friend. Yeah. There's going to be some things that you have to deal with. That's totally fine. That's what working on projects is like. And take this opportunity to consciously kind of reflect on that daily, right? And then use that knowledge when you get into your final project, right? Those learnings to be even better. Although to be honest, like my midterm projects are always like a super enjoyable experience because you're going to take all the stuff that you've learned in the past little while and consolidate it, right? And I think this is where like a lot of people find that you are ready to be web developers, right? You have technically at this point in the bootcamp done front-end, back-end, databases, login, right? You've worked with APIs. You have done everything that a web developer really needs to do, right? The stuff that we're going to learn later on in bootcamp is just next level of each one of these things, right? Next level of databases, next level of front-end, next level of back-end. You're technically ready to be a web developer. Right. So I think that's where like a lot of people tend to have a ton of fun with this. So I'm going to talk a little bit about ERDs, and then I'll let you have a break. What is an ERD? It's an entity relationship diagram. Are you still ready to code? Absolutely not. Right? You should not have at this point written any code. Instead, it's time to work on our good old ERDs. Here is an ERD, users, posts, comments. Apparently this is an ERD for a website that has users. Users can have many posts. Users can have many comments. And posts can have many comments on them. Right? Where do you think this information about what goes into your ERD, where do you think that comes from? It's like it comes from your user stories. What? Yeah. Your tables are nouns that come from your user stories, right? You look at your user story after you've made it, and you pick up the nouns. You're like, oh, as a user, I want to save a story. Save it to my saved stories. Cool. Right there, I know there are users, I know there are stories, and I know that users can have saved stories. Right? It is impossible to build this thing without user stories. It's impossible. You can't do it. If you manage to do this without making any user stories that are like at least even in your head, right? Call me up because we need to write a paper about that. I've never seen that happen. Your tables are going to be the nouns that come out of that stuff, right? This process here, making ERDs, once you have user stories, is not actually super hard, right? Especially once you get into the pattern of it, right? It's going to be tough the first time or 2 times around, right? But if like I suggested, you pick a couple different projects to brainstorm on, you're going to find that coming up with ERDs is going to be a pretty rote process, right? There's a pretty mechanical kind of thing to it. Right? And yeah, I don't know. Do I want to talk about tech choices right now? Probably time for a break before we dive into that. But spend like a good amount of time on your ERDs. Now, with your ERDs, like you've already done that for assignments. There are many ways of structuring an ERD, right, or structuring a database for applications. Like for one application may have a couple different ways of structuring it. Check with mentors, right? Make an ERD, call up a mentor. Yo, does this ERD look good? No? Okay, well, what can I do to fix it? And then you're ready to go on to maybe thinking about tech. So it being 10:47, I like to use this as like a halfway point to then like jump into the tech stack stuff. Should I? Yeah, we'll take a break. But are there any questions? Cool. Who here is just like hyped? Just like, oh, this is gonna be, yeah. Oh, let's hear your like guttural, primal growl for code. Yeah, for code. Just data. Oh. All right. So, and I'm assuming that Calgary is in on this too. All right. On 3, 1, 2, 3, team. We're gonna get back together at. It's gonna be 11. We'll take a 12-minute break. Does that sound good? You want to take a 13-minute break? All right. We'll do 11:01. 1 minute extra for you, and that's gonna be 12 o'clock for Calgary. Well.
guy who's a game programmer in it, and he loves techno.
Yeah.
Well, he like dresses like he's Neo from the Matrix. He's like the joke of the movie.
I dressed up like Neo in high school for Halloween once. I bought a trench coat and I wore like just a black shirt and black pants and boots and I had glasses. And everyone's like, "Oh, yo, Neo, I get it." I'm like, "Yeah, I had like jelly beans. You know, I had like red jelly beans and blue jelly beans." And then, you know, the next day I'm like, this could be a decision that I make. Like I wore a trench coat for like a couple months. Not a good social decision. That's yeah, no, I never hit fedora level, but I was trench coat level, and then there was a while where I wore like a blazer. I would wear like a pretty cheap blazer that I bought from the Bay. It was gray. What's that? What is that, Steve? Yo, one of those for me? Oh, they're downstairs. Oh, they had ice cream downstairs. Right. Wait, Calgary, one sec. All right. Sweet. So, welcome back. Well, I don't know. I don't know where the tickets are. Welcome back, Calgary. Can you let me know if the audio is or is not working? Actually, you can't let me know if the audio is not working, but tell me if the audio and video are, and then we'll get going. I mean, if y'all want to run down and get ice cream, like, that's cool.
I have a ticket. Tickets, please.
We'll see. Is the video and audio working? And we'll see.
You know, there's also like really cool. There's like either a website or a software that helps you make user stories. Like it has prompts for you.
Oh yeah.
And all that other stuff. And then it like spits out like comic strips.
Oh, okay.
For your user stories.
That's cool. All right. So, yeah. Sorry. You guys, y'all have Nutrigrain bars? That's awesome. I mean, that's healthy. So sweet. So Calgary's back on the line. Josh, if you find the name of that website, put it in the Slack for both Vancouver and Calgary. Yeah. So apparently there's a website that lets you, or it takes you through a wizard to generate user stories, and then gives you a little comic for it, which is cute. So if you find that, yeah, it's in there. It's time to talk about tech choices. There are so many different choices that you can pick from when you're building your midterm projects and your just projects in general. We're going to talk about midterm projects. Many choices, especially for things like deployment. You're not ready to code yet, but it's something that like you can think about a little bit as you get starting. Deployment meaning if I want my application to be used by someone, then I need to be able to put this online or make it accessible to a user. Deployment options. Here are two options. Pick one. One of them, good old localhost 3000. You can run your applications locally. That's fine. Fun fact, when you run applications locally, other people can actually access your application if you give them your IP address. Right? I think I might have done that with this cohort. Yeah, it didn't work with Calgary, but it did with Vancouver, which was the TCP one, right? So there's that. Another option, though, is deploying to Heroku. Deploying to Heroku is not particularly difficult as long as you follow the guides. But it might be something that you want to like try a tutorial or two at the beginning of your project when you have some time at lunch. I wouldn't honestly dedicate too much time to this. Localhost is totally fine. If you again have a little bit of time, then sure, take a look at Heroku. Mentors are more than happy to help you with it.
Is it a decision you can make at the end? Like
Working on localhost 8 was probably
Sort of. So the question here was, is this a decision you can make at the end? And unfortunately, the answer to that is kind of. The thing is, like, you can make stuff work with Heroku. That if you start off with by following, when you're setting up your project in the first place, following the Heroku guidelines, right? Then you're gonna have an easier time deploying. Trying to make your project work for Heroku later can be tough when you're trying to figure out things like environment variables, database connections, and stuff like that. Right? That's where things get kind of hairy. So it's like, if you leave it to the very last day and you're like, oh, I'm going to try and get Heroku working, you're likely going to have a hard time. Yes, you're likely going to have a hard time. But you know, if there's anywhere that I would recommend doing it, it's in the first couple of days, right? Mess around with it a little bit and see if it's something that seems like something you want to do. Again, though, if it's the last couple of days and you do want to try it, like, mentors are going to be more than happy to help you out with that. Server framework. You have a ton of choices for server framework. You're still not ready to code, but you do need to think long and hard about what server framework you're going to use. You have one choice. You're using Express on Node.js. So for your midterm, that's easy. But in the future, like, you're going to have many other options. When you're working on final projects, for example, I saw somebody use Python. I saw someone use Django with Python 2 cohorts ago. It was wild. It was the bravest choice I've ever seen anyone do, and they were able to get absolutely zero mentor support for it because no mentors worked with Python. But they learned a lot. They learned a ton. So, you know, if you want to challenge yourself for your final, that's cool. Midterms, though, Node.js and Express. That's really about it. Don't forget about using NPM. You can install packages. You can install middleware, right? Maybe there's something that you're trying to do that would be good with some middleware. Go look on NPM. Go look on GitHub to see if that stuff is already made somewhere. And, now, as we're talking about the technical aspect of things, one of the things that you have to think about is the routes, right? The routes for your application. Meaning, what endpoints are going to exist on your back end? Oh, my ice cream. Oh. No, I won't eat it. I'm just going to hold it. So you melt. Yeah, actually, wait, let me put this in the fridge. No, there's a fridge. No, I'm going to, like, it's going to. Huh? What's? Oh, did you not know there was a fridge there this whole time? No, it's a fridge. And well, it'll melt slower. I just didn't want to like eat it because the microphone. I'm sure Calgary would not love listening to me lick ice cream. That's true. I'm not even going to repeat that. So the thing that you have to think about is the routes that your application's going to have. Like, what server endpoints exist? Where do you think your routes are going to be coming from? From your user stories. Yeah, they're going to come directly from your user stories. Your routes are going to be things like, okay, am I going to have a get route? And I'm going to have a get and post and put and delete. You know, will I be having params in my URLs? The ways that I recommend designing your routes is to follow the REST conventions. Just to check, have y'all talked about RESTful routing before? Huh? Okay, we're gonna do a little bit of a challenge then. I just need to make sure. So, no, we're gonna do. Let me open up Notepad. Right. Okay, here we go. We're gonna do this. If I was to make a route to get all the dogs, what would my route look like? So you say this was post/dogs/12. That's like, if we want to create something like that, what would get all the dogs look like? Get slash dogs. Okay. Get slash dogs. If I wanted to delete a specific dog's chew toy. That's a tough one. So that's the dog ID. What does post mean? So post means I'm creating something, right? No, well, I said I want to delete.
Well, you're gonna do the fake. Well, can you do that fake delete? Or you just put the delete at the end?
You could, but if we were following RESTful conventions, we'd go like delete. What's that? Oh, great. Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Casey. It is delete slash dogs ID. Now, what you've written there is to delete a particular dog, which works, but it doesn't do exactly what I'm looking for. I'm switching out the dongle, Calgary. Let me see if this fresh new one works. Looks like it does. Sweet. So I'm going to take you through what I mean by RESTful conventions. I'm just going to make a file. I'm going to send this to you in the notes. So when people talk about REST is a way of coming up with routes, right? It's like a naming convention for your routes. So we'll start off by listing out what our nouns are. What are our nouns, right? So for example, I'm going to have a hypothetical project where this is a website where you can have dogs, and every dog can have chew toys, right? So for example, my nouns might be dogs and chew toys, and then I might even list out like associations such as chew toys are owned by dogs, right? And once you've listed out some nouns, then you can say, okay, what can I do to those nouns? Okay, what are some actions that I can do on those nouns to come up with the possible routes that might be necessary? So for example, I might be able to get a list of all the dogs, right? So if one of my user stories is get a list of all the dogs, right? REST says that your route is going to be get slash dogs. To get a single dog, okay, the RESTful convention is to go get slash dogs and then an ID, like 12. Okay, that's going to get you one dog. If I wanted to get all of the chew toys for a dog, so some nested resource, right, this would be get slash dogs, the particular dog, and then chew toys to get all the chew toys for that dog. So all toys for dog number 12. Right? And then I can add, I can like change the particular verb that I'm using, the method, to change the action. So for example, if I wanted to create a new chew toy for dog number 12, the RESTful convention for that is post, like you said, bread, right? So post for creation. And then I say dogs 12 chew toys. And then I need to have some data that eventually gets passed in, right, for that dog. And then ultimately, say I wanted to get something that's even more nested in, or what I said was delete, for example, delete a particular chew toy. The route for that in REST is going to be delete because I'm deleting. And then I need to access the chew toy. So that's going to be dogs 12 chew toys, and then the ID of the chew toy, such as 4. And so there's a recipe to RESTful routing, and the recipe is going to come out of what are our nouns, and what can I do to those nouns. Right? The stuff that I've listed out here, these are pretty much all the variations of what you can do with RESTful routes. I'm going to give this to you in the notes, and you can use that to start baking your own routes. Right? Again, though, these things are going to come out of like directly out of your user stories. Right? So here, if I'm looking at this, I can see, okay, well, I want to Yeah, Russell says with npm method override, you can do delete. You can also do that stuff with Ajax. But if I look at my user story, as a user, I want to save a story that I'm reading. That's going to mean to me that I need to be able to read a story, right? Meaning that I need a route for retrieving a story. Right? If I'm saying I want to tap the icon to save a story, I can highlight that and say that that's an action a user's taking. That's an action that the user's taking, which should then do something, right? Such as add it to saved stories, right? It's up to you how you decide to write those routes, but RESTful routing is going to help you come up with stuff pretty quickly. Right? If you want to follow some of the standard, then that's cool too. Right? But again, with the routing, this is very much the kind of thing that, like, me talking about it right now, it can only get you so far. You're going to have to kind of do it after you do your ERDs, bring in a mentor, right, and have them check it. Have them double check it. Right? And this all happens before you write a single line of code. Kind of interchangeably with when you're working on your routes, you can also work on your wireframes. Right? These things don't have to happen at this point like one after another. I find that my routes and my wireframes kind of go hand in hand. Your wireframes are a visual representation of your user stories. They're going to be a way to describe, sure, the layout, the data hierarchy, but more explicitly, what I like to think of them as is your user stories visualized, right? So that I can see the interactions that a user can have with the application. If my original user story was, going way back, was I want to be able to see all the movies that are playing in my area, well, then my wireframe should enact that. It should show me how I see all the movies in my area. Right? Your wireframes don't have to be super high resolution. Right? These are not mockups. These are wireframes, meaning we're just seeing the layout and the structure. You don't even need to put colors and stuff in here. This is really just high-level hierarchy. You can do this stuff on a whiteboard. You can do this stuff on paper. You can do this stuff using some wireframing tool like Balsamiq. Like there's a tool called Balsamiq, like balsamic vinegar, but with a Q at the end. If you Google like wireframing tools, there's going to be tons of them. Right? Really, it's just get your ideas out in a way that your group members, like all of you, and this should be a group situation, you can all discuss on the wireframes to agree or disagree on whether they're enacting the user stories. Right? This needs to be a process that everybody is involved in. All too often I see like, oh, I'll work on the wireframes, and somebody goes off to do them. It's like, no, because then you're disengaging the wireframes from the stakeholders. Right? You're all stakeholders, and you all need to have input on how this stuff is built. Right? Your wireframes don't need to be super high res, but they can't be garbage. Like they can't be this. What does image mean? I have no idea. What does text? I don't know what that means, but fine, fair enough. Apparently there's some text in here. What? Oh, great, now the little bar is there. We'll just wait for the little bar to... What does notifications mean? What does notifications mean? Does that mean a bar that has like a ticker, like a news ticker that slides across and tells you the notifications? Is it a bar with lots of little icons that can turn on or off? Right? Is it a thing that you tap on or click on and it slides up? I have no idea, because this wireframe does not do any job of telling me what that internal part looks like, right? And how somebody could interact with it. Right? And you need to have a discussion as a group, like, have we gone too high level? Like, let's maybe go a little bit lower. What's funny about this wireframe here is that this is a real wireframe that a student was given at their job, at like their first internship, and they couldn't figure out what to build because this is what their like senior had given them. They're like, oh, build something like this. And they're like, I don't know what notifications is supposed to be. No idea. So your wireframes, oh yeah, there's a little, yep, and then totally, and then what the heck, you know? Here's another example of a wireframe. This is equally, to me, a nightmare because it's very complicated. There's so much going on. There's a breadcrumb trail at the top, right? there are 3 buttons entitled button. Cool. There is a sign-up form. Oh, whoops. Sign-up form, an image placeholder, a bunch of text. Why is there a video here? What are these 3 image placeholders for? Is this a carousel? I have no idea. Right? This is an actual nightmare. You can make things a lot simpler. Right? This is probably a good place to start. This one here is OK. Right? Again, your wireframes, there's no recipe for this stuff. You have to just kind of talk about it with your group. Right? And you have to look at it, play around with it, show it to somebody else, may show it to another group, and say, hey, do you have a minute to take a look at my wireframes and kind of testing this idea out? Right? This is very much the kind of thing that you need to involve many people into. Right? Working on your own can quickly lead to like a design that makes sense to you but doesn't make sense to anybody else. Once you have a couple wireframes together, and like I said, the wireframes come out of your user stories, you can hook wireframes up together. I don't mean like physically hook wireframes up together so like they're next to each other, but to yourself, take yourself through the wireframes the way a user would. Right? We're going to call that storyboarding. Right? Oh, first I do this, and that leads me to this, and this leads me to this, and that leads me to this here. Right? So you can see the natural progression of how somebody's using your application. Next Friday, you are doing presentations. Right? Fun fact. The easiest way to make your presentations is to take a look at your user stories and your storyboards, right? And take people through that process. Right? If you frame your project around the idea of a narrative, right? Around the idea of a user, like, hey, I'm Tammy, and I like movies, then you can take yourself through that person, that persona, right? Using your application in a meaningful way, right? That is interesting to people who are watching the presentation. Right? So hot tip, following that kind of idea of storyboarding, tying your user stories with your wireframes, easy way to see whether your application is being structured properly or not. Right? Again, have we coded anything yet? No. This is a lot of stuff to do up to this point. We are at slide 37. That's a lot of slides. Right? Lots of slides. You shouldn't finish this today. Like, I would be surprised if you were coding stuff today. You should be wireframing into like midday tomorrow, right? Maybe even later in the day. Right? You have tons of time, right? So make plenty of time to do that stuff. Yeah, so you want to set up like a timeline of your user workflow, whether that means actually taking your wireframes and printing them out next to each other, or whether that means just going 1, 3, 7, if you've numbered your wireframes, whatever. But come up with a path that comes from your user stories. OK, are there any questions so far? Cool. And I'm just going to wait a second for Calgary. Nope. OK. Time to talk about design. Design matters. This is the turtlenecky kind of design. However, it's like it starts off all aesthetic, like rule of thirds and whatever, and then there's just however. You are developers. This is not a design boot camp. Just steal. Just steal stuff. Go on Dribble, Folio Focus, Smashing. Go on other websites that do the thing that you're trying to do. So say you're doing the resource wall, go to Pinterest and look at how they've designed their stuff. Right? If you're doing wiki maps, you go to Google Maps and look at how Google Maps has structured their stuff. Steal. For example, if you were making a landing page, which you're not necessarily, but like if you were making a landing page, every website ever uses this kind of landing page structure. Maybe it's changed a little bit in the past little while, but most websites have very similar landing pages, and it's because it works. You don't need to over-engineer this stuff. Here's a terrible slide with a picture of a crane and a quote. I don't know if that gives you some philosophical or like some motivation. Just steal design. People like good-looking applications. Unfortunately, and this is just the reality of web development and the reality of the world, is you can make the most impressive technical application, right? Like, oh, there's machine learning, computer vision, blockchain. This thing is controlled with my brain, like whatever, like all this stuff. But if your UI, if your like design is ugly and you show it to people, people will still go like, oh, okay, all right. Like they won't like it. Fine, I'll put some rounded borders on it. Okay, I'll put a gradient in there. Yeah. So do that. You steal stuff and specifically use a UI framework. Now, this UI framework-wise, I think there's something in Compass already. I think we're just about to change that. But basically, the deal here is like, try to use something that helps you with building CSS stuff, whether that is just making use of straight up CSS, whether that is using Bootstrap, right? Whether that is using some other CSS framework. I think we're going to put a list on Compass if we haven't yet. Use something to kind of leverage to make your applications kind of quickly. As an example, like have you seen Bootstrap yet? Kind of? Right? So the thing that's nice about Bootstrap, and again, you don't have to use Bootstrap, but the nice thing about Bootstrap is like, if I wanted to make, where'd you go? A little Bootstrap components. Trying to see the, oh, there you go, components. If I wanted to make a button, for example, the default HTML button's pretty ugly, but the default Bootstrap button, ooh, beautiful. Look at that. Got a little fade in. Got those little rounded borders, right? Right. If you wanted to make a drop-down form, I don't know if you've ever tried to make a drop-down with HTML and like CSS and JavaScript. Not a fun time. Drop-down buttons with Bootstrap. Woo. Look at that little hover. Yeah, those little rounded borders. So use something to kind of help you out there. Bootstrap is my recommendation, but we're going to have a list in Compass for you to play with. Really just pick one. In this slide, which hasn't been updated, it says Bootstrap or Foundation Zerb. This is very outdated. Foundation Zerb, not the best option right now. So, like, I'm giving you these slides, but again, for the CSS and design framework part of it, use what is going to be in Compass. And does that make sense? Like, just use something. For every single time I build an application, I go to this thing called Ant Design. You can't use Ant Design because it's a React thing, and you haven't worked with React yet. But Ant Design has very, very nice little drop downs. Right? I like their little drop downs. I like their little. I mean, have you ever seen a form this pretty? That's a beautiful form, right? And I mean, look at this. If I click on this and I click, where was it? If I try to register, it pops up the little validations, which are so nice. And you don't have to build the stuff from scratch. In the future, you might use something like Ant Design. Right now, just use a particular like UI framework that we'll give you. Okay. Getting very close. Getting tantalizingly close to being ready to code. It's like right there. Git. How many of you have used Git? Gary, I'm worried for you, man. So you've used Git. Do you remember talking about the various processes for using Git on, it would have been like day one or like close to that, right? Through mentors, through assignments, working with branches, all that stuff. Very much a thing you have to do now because you're working with groups. So let's follow some good Git practices. When you're working with a group, generally, there are like 2 different ways that you can kind of do this. One is you can have one repo that everybody has access to, or you can have one repo that everybody forks, right? So that everybody has their own version of the repo. And then if you pick version 1, right, if you pick the idea of having one repo that everybody is a contributor to, then you can follow this pattern here. Not that, this pattern here, which is everybody clones, and then whenever you want to work on a feature, you branch, you code. Then when you're done coding, and as you're coding, you like git commit, push, commit, push, commit, push. Right? When you're ready to take that feature and merge it in to your actual project, then you check out master. You pull to make sure that master is up to date, and then you can merge your stuff in. And then once you've done that, you push, and just repeat and repeat and repeat. Honestly, there are 2 of you per team. You should take yourselves through the first 1 or 2 features together, right? And get comfortable with that process. There's more than one way to work on a Git project. Not like there's definitely a wrong way, but there isn't a right way. There's multiple ways that are kind of going to work. If you have interest or experience with like pull requests, for example, you can take a look at that. But what I would really, really recommend to do is ask mentors as you're working through this stuff. Right? And you can get insight from like different mentors. Everyone, again, heads up, every mentor is going to give you a different answer, right? But there will be like common threads to it. Right? Another way to do this is you can fork from the main repo, and then as you're working on the stuff, instead of doing a merge, you'd have to go through a process called a pull request, right? And I'll let you Google what a pull request is, right? You'll find an article or 2. They're not very long, right? And that's like if you want to do some advanced Git stuff, if you really want to get some advanced experience. For right now, since it's the midterm, it's totally fine for you to just go by this process here. And what we're really trying to get to is making sure that we are not coding on master at any point. We also want to make sure that we're never committing bad code. And that's hard. Like it's hard to make sure that the code that you write is good, but what you can do is test your code. Does that mean writing unit tests? Not necessarily, right? You can get by without having to write unit tests. But what you can do is test your stuff manually. Right? You can take yourself through the things that your project's supposed to be able to do at any one of these points. When you code, when you pull, when you merge, make sure that your project hasn't been broken. Right? It's bad practice to commit something that breaks something else. Like even if you know that you fixed a problem, but it broke a different thing, it's bad practice to still commit that. You should make sure that you only commit like good stuff. Fun fact, when I tell you that you can test your application by running through it and making sure it still does the stuff it's supposed to do, what do you think you could use as the test bank?
Other classmates?
Yeah, the other classmates, yeah. I'm saying more like, where do you think you have a document that says what your application is supposed to be able to like do? Your user stories. Yeah, your user stories are your tests, right? Like every time you're coding, every time you're about to commit, take yourself through the user stories and go, okay, well, which ones of these can I do, right? And please, do not code on master. Just don't. If you were thinking of coding on master, I'd like to stop you. Please don't do that. Yeah, not really much to say here. Just don't. Make a branch. Just make a branch. OK, very, very close. scaffolding. This actually does mean sort of starting to code, not really implementing features, but more making sure that your project is set up properly. This is a process that should be done as a group. Everybody should be involved in this. Pair programming, right? We're going to get together, and you're going to go through a checklist. And you take yourself through, this is a horrible color for the slide, eh? Not very visible, but you take yourself through the checklist. First of all, set up the GitHub repository, right? One of the people in your group, right? One of the pair makes the GitHub repository. Add collaborators. In your GitHub repo settings, there is a place where you can add other users to be able to edit that repo. Then, on one computer, right, download and install all the resources that are going to be needed. Make sure that npm is working, right? Make sure that all that stuff is working. In this case here, you're using Postgres, which is already built in. Right? You're using Express and all that stuff. Just make sure that that stuff is npm installed, right? Use CDN links wherever possible. So as you're setting up a hello world project, right? Just a simple hello world. If you're putting in things like Bootstrap and stuff like that, I would recommend using CDN links. You did that for jQuery, if you remember, right? So same with jQuery. You just use a link. It's much easier to include dependencies that way. Make sure that your app loads with just a hello world. Push your app to GitHub, and then have everybody else, in this case, the other person in your group, clone. And make sure that that's working on that computer as well. Right? We want to make sure that the hello world is working everywhere before we even move forward. Right? Before we move into figuring out the team responsibilities. Because the team responsibilities are going to take a little while to figure out. Dividing tasks is not an easy situation. It's different in every company you go to. Right? At Nima Boscarino's School of Midterm Projects, we divide projects in whichever way you kind of see fit. You could go front end and back end. Sure. Right? One person works on front end, one person works on back end. That works. That's fine. You can do, one person does all the database stuff and the migrations and whatever, and then the other person does all the Ajax-y stuff, and you scope out the things that you want to work on. I'm very, very partial to this. My favorite way for midterm projects and final projects is to divide tasks by feature. Right? I find that it's the easiest way to get everybody in the group to touch every part of the code base. I don't want you to finish these projects and then only be able to talk about half the project. Right? I just don't like leaving you in the situation where when somebody asks you about the thing, you say, I don't know, my partner worked on that. Right? And that goes for the midterm projects, and it also goes for the final projects. In the future, when you're working somewhere, you will likely be pigeonholed into front end or back end. Likely. Right? Some places have full stack roles. But right now, take advantage of the fact that you haven't been pushed into those holes yet, right? And you can touch every part of your application. Right? So if you have your list of user stories, right, and you organize those user stories such that this one needs to be implemented, then this one, then this one, then this one, then you can take each one of those and work from front to back. Right? Do all of the front-end stuff and all of the back-end stuff and all the database stuff. Right? That's totally a thing that can happen. And again, I find it the most effective way to learn from these projects. Right? Again, you're not making these projects so that you can present them and so that you can sell this stuff to someone. You're making these projects so that you can learn. Right? So the easiest way to learn this stuff is to get to touch everything. Now, since you're in small groups, one other thing that I do, again, I've said this before, but I want to repeat, recommend is I would really like for you to pair program. Right? Especially the first couple features, you sit down and you say, hey, let's together tackle this one feature. Right? Let's see what we're going to be doing. Right? You do a couple features together, and then you can split up. And maybe you come back again together. Maybe there's a feature that you really want to work on, or you want to learn about, but you feel like you're not ready to do it yourself. Pair program. Right? That's something you're going to do here, but also in your final project. Again, if you want to divide tasks by front end, back end, that's totally fine. But I firmly believe that it's too early for you to like split yourself like that. In fact, and I've heard students say this before, like, oh, I'm definitely more of a front end person. If this is week 5 and you're saying that, I'd recommend putting a lot of weight on the back end, right? I'd recommend really changing things up for yourself because it's way too early for you to like close yourself off like that. And now you are ready to code. What? Amazing, it's time. You get to write a little bit of hello world, and you can go in and do your stuff. You might still want some tips for how to scaffold out various parts of your application. Here's some tips for front end. Start with static pages first. You don't need to have the data already. Just make the page using some hard-coded HTML and CSS if that helps you out. Use some placeholders. Okay. Try out your layouts with different amounts of data to make sure that your designs are nice and don't like bleed out when there's too much text or stuff like that. The back-end scaffolding, I find this is a little bit like a bit more involved and kind of more important to think about. But you should start off by thinking about your data objects when you're thinking about your backend, right? So you're creating your routes, and you're starting to think about like how you're going to interact with stuff. You can act as if your data already exists by hard coding that data, similar to what we did for TinyApp, right? Where we had hard-coded object with some data in there, and you can start building like that. When you're trying to write particular functionality, right? So maybe you're trying to make a query, right? You can try to work on that in the REPL. You don't have to have your full like application running. You don't have to have everything like implemented to just test out one query. You can go into the Postgres shell and write a query, right? Or you can write your query in JavaScript in the REPL to see if that thing runs, right? And then bring it into your code base, right? Try to take a playground kind of approach to this. Obviously, code atomically. Try to find places where you can modularize. And then I also think it's particularly important to I lost my train of thought. It was a really bad place in my sentence to lose my train of thought. Oh, there you go. It's particularly important to test your backend without a front end. Have you seen Postman yet? Yeah? Some of you may have. I don't think it was something shown in a lecture, but maybe some mentors showed you. Same with Calgary. I don't know if you've seen this. So Postman is an API development tool. So go Google Postman. You've played with curl at this point. Postman is basically a GUI for curl. So I don't know if I have Postman installed. I do. Postman is basically a GUI for curl that you can use to test your backend without having a fully built front end yet. So for example, I can go into Postman and I can say, okay, well, what happens when I make a GET request to https google.com? And I make a GET request, and then I see the response, which was all of this HTML. Right? Or I can say, hey, what happens when I make a GET request to, or a POST request to google.com, and I send, and I got another response, method not allowed or whatever. And if you're implementing a JSON API, right? That's what your backend is. It's a JSON API likely. Then one of the things that you can do is, make requests to your JSON API and make sure that the output is correct every time. Right? So take some time to test out with that. Whether you want to do it with curl or Postman, in one way or another, like know that you can test your backend without having a front end fully built yet. And then we're going to go to the last and arguably most important part, which is communication. And just talk to each other. Just use a tool. I don't know. Use Slack. Use Telegram. Something. Just pick one. You just boop, 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 boop. Just chat with each other. Just use a little. Yeah, semaphores, right? Just chat. I have seen one group for final projects once. This is my favorite thing. They sat next to like a window. They sat next to a window, and when they were working, they used like a washable marker. Every hour, they would check in on each other. This was a group of like 3 people for a final project. They would check in on each other, and they would have an ongoing graph to chart out their morale. So over the course of the day, you'd see like, whoa, and then maybe, and it was a good place to kind of be reflective and catch each other, right? And they would say, okay, every hour, let's check in with each other. 1 minute, how are we feeling? Because chances are you will run into some technical issues. They will be hard, and you get kind of tough on yourself, and you go, oh, what? Why can't I do this? Because it's hard, right? It's okay. Ask for help from your peers, ask for help from your mentors, ask for help from me or other people. It's going to be okay. Last but not least, maybe use Trello to like store your stuff. People tend to like Trello. You can if you've never used Trello before, somebody in the area has used it, and just ask them to give you a quick tutorial. It's basically online post-it notes to keep track of the features that you've completed or haven't completed or are doing right now. That's it. That's the whole presentation. We made it through a heckin' 67 slides. What? Congratulations. I'm proud of you. Can somebody join in with me, please? Thank y'all. Thanks. All right. Congratulations. I'm just fully kind of hyped for all of you to be working on this stuff. It's going to be very cool. The midterm projects, I think, are, again, like one of the most exciting parts of the boot camp. We really get to flex. You're like, I can do all this stuff. What? It's crazy, and you're going to discover some cool things about yourself. So have a good time with it. And again, reach out anytime you have any questions. That goes for Calgary. That goes for Vancouver. If there's somebody in between also, that goes for you too. Yeah. So are there any questions from Calgary or from Vancouver about any of this? Is anybody feeling ready to do the card game? Maybe not?
It's not that bad.
Not that bad. Sweet. Oh, thank you, Scott. Yeah, all right. Well, get hyped. Have a good time. And I've gifted you with an extra 12 minutes. Isn't that crazy? We ended the first half at 48. So exactly 1 hour for the second half. Right? It did. It really did. So have a great rest of the day, and cheers. Wait, Lucas says, so where do we start? Well, when you get into your groups, you start from slide 1, I guess. Yeah. Lucas, if you want, you can message me directly and we can chat about that.